Hey, do you want to know more about the bishop and all about its full potential? Well, if you do, then stay tuned because I'm going to share with you something about the bishop that you don't know up to now. Like seriously. So this is a collection of both my new and old videos about the power of the bishop or the psychology of the bishop. So you don't want to skip this video. Stay tuned and watch up to the end if you want to become the master of the bishop. Stay tuned. Fact number 1. The bishop is mostly used as a sacrificial lamb for positional sacrifices on f7 and f2, sacrificed for the common good. For example, you can sacrifice your bishop as early as move 4. You start with e4, black plays d6, the perk defense, and then you go bishop c4. You can see in the Lichess database the top played move is knight to f6. White normally defends the pawn on e4 with d3, and some even play queen f3, but you can also play the weird looking pawn to d4 move, which invites knight takes e4 by black, and this is when you can surprise your opponent right on move 4 by sacrificing your bishop on f7, bishop takes f7 check, so that after king takes, you go queen h5 check, provoking black to make a weakness on g6, then you go queen d5 check, and on the next move you're going to win the knight like this. For example, black may play bishop g7, then you go knight to f3 first, developing your knights before any other pieces is always advantageous. Watch this video that has popped up in the card above where I emphasized on this. Rook f8, then you go pawn to h4 immediately, wanting to go h5. If pawn to h5, you have knight g5 check, and on the next move, you're going to win the pawn on g6, which is not good for black. So this is one example of how you can use your bishop as a sacrificial lamb on f7 to slow down black's game. Another example is where you start with e4, then instead of d6, black starts with c5, it doesn't matter, but still you go knight to f3, they play d6, the modern variation, you go pawn to d4, all normal stuff, then they play knight f6, attacking your undefended pawn on e4. Again, you don't always have to defend this pawn, or you can still go bishop c4, inviting knight takes e4 immediately because that's what everybody plays, you can see, and that's when you go bishop takes f7 check, they have to take your bishop, and then you go queen h5 check, provoking a weakness once again on g6, then you go queen d5 check, and on the next move you are going to win the knight on e4, and surprisingly enough, the second most played move here is bishop e6 as you can see, which is just a free piece, so black doesn't have to play like this, and here you are definitely winning the game. Anyways, another example that I can show you where you can use your light squared bishop as a sacrificial lamb is in the king's pawn game, e4, e5, then knight's opening, where black has to protect his e5 pawn, and then you go pawn to d4, the Scotch game, then bishop c4, and now black plays bishop c5. The move that you can consider playing here is pawn to c3 immediately. At best, you just want to take the free pawn on d4, and you're also sacrificing a second pawn, by the way. If black takes, which is the top played move, the easiest you can do is to go bishop takes f7 check. Again, you can see this good positional sacrifice, making black lose his right to castle after capturing the bishop, and that's when you go queen d5 check, and on the next move, you don't even win black's dark squared bishop immediately. First of all, you provoke this weakness that we've been talking about. You can see these highlighted weaknesses in red after black plays pawn to g6, and that's when you take the dark squared bishop. On the next move, you can even align your pieces like this. Black has a lot of weaknesses, you're going to castle short. This is simply winning for white. If you want to know how you can sacrifice your bishop on f2 with black pieces, you can watch this video that has popped up in the card above. After watching this video, let's move on. Fact number 2. The bishop and knight are actually best friends. Yep, chess players usually value a bishop more than a knight because of its long reach. Yeah, like the bishop can move from one flank to another in just one move. Rubbish. The truth is that it depends with the position and the stage of the game. Bishop and knight tend to work together very well in the opening stage. For example, you start with e4, black plays e5, then you open up with the bishop's opening, and then you can see the top played move is knight to f6. Then you ignore this attack and play knight to f3, giving black one more chance to take your free pawn on e4. If you want, you can take back on e5, by the way, but consider playing knight c3, inviting black to accept your Boden-Kitzer-Risky gambit, which is also known as the reverse Stafford gambit. I like this gambit because it gives black more chances to blunder. For example, there's only one correct move in this position, which is very weird, by the way. Pawn to f6 is the correct move. If black plays the top played move, pawn to d6, for example, this is the best example where the bishop and knight can be very deadly. So you can see this good combination, the bishop targeting the f7 square and the knight also targeting the f7 square. Black cannot do anything here without losing material. For example, bishop e6, you just take, and there's another threat on f7 or on b7. A more decent example to show you how the bishop and knight can work together very well in the opening stage is in the fried liver attack, which arises from the two knights defense, the position that you're seeing on the board right now, where you can go knight g5, and now we see that the knight and the bishop are both targeting the weak f7 pawn. So black has to play d5, but you can just take. If they take back, well, you can even sack your knight on f7 like this, because after black takes with his king, you will go queen f3 check. Note that black's knight is also pinned to the king by our light squared bishop. So if king e6, you go knight c3, putting more pressure on this pinned knight. Then knight b4 is what everybody plays. The whole secret with the fried liver attack, you guys, is this pawn to d4 move, and the fact that black's king will be on the center for a longer period of time. So don't worry about the fact that you are down a piece. You're not mating anytime soon. Just go ahead and castle short. If c6, now you go pawn to d4. That's the secret. So that if queen f6, you don't trade queens, by the way, you are the one attacking. So you want to keep the queens on the board. So you go queen d1. If e takes d4, you have knight e4 attacking the queen, and queen g6, you go pawn to a3. If they go knight a6, you go queen takes d4. Note that black has no game. His position is cramped. Fact number 3, you don't always need a bishop pair in your life. Anyways, yeah, they say two bishops are stronger than bishop and knight, but certain openings don't necessarily require you to have a bishop pair, e.g. the advanced Caro-Kann defense, the Perk defense, the French, or let me just show you. White starts with e4, then you go pawn to c6, the Caro-Kann defense. They play d4, you go d5, and then you can see the top played move is pawn to e5, which is the top played move in both the Lichess and the Masters database. The whole idea in the advanced Caro-Kann is to develop your light squad bishop as quickly as you can, moving it out of the pawn chain. If knight f3, you go pawn to e6. The whole idea is to trade off your light squared bishop as quickly as you can, and that's when you switch to your French defense ideas with the immediate pawn to c5. They play c3, now you go knight c6, everything that you do in the French defense, by the way. You can go queen b6 if you want, but I like queen c7. If bishop e3, you simplify the game like this, and then you want to continue your development as highlighted. I don't want to spoil much. If you want to know more about the Caro-Kann defense, get my Caro-Kann course at www.KaspaChess.com, and it will be your favorite defense against pawn to e4. Anyways, another good opening where you don't always need your bishop pair is in the Perk defense with pawn to d6. The whole idea is that after d4, a knight f6, normal variation, knight c3, the pawn to g6, and knight to f3. It's up to you to go for bishop g4 immediately and trade off your light squad bishop, or continue normally with bishop g7 and wait for black to play the most played move, bishop c4, after which you castle short and they castle short. Then, even though you have an opportunity to take on e4, by the way, in case you didn't know, because you're going to double attack white's knight and the light squad bishop, you can just go ahead and play bishop g4, get rid of your light squared bishop, and then start playing chess like this. Ladies and gentlemen, this is considered to be favorable for black. For example, here you are attacking the d4 square. If bishop e3, you have pawn to e5 immediately. If they play d5, you can go knight e7 if you want, but even better knight d4, so that if bishop takes, you take back. And in most cases, white will find it very difficult to win back the pawn on d4, because you have so many options. For example, knight d7 is a good move because it paves way for your dark squared bishop as well. So you gave up your bishop pair, and in the process, you forced black to give up his bishop pair as well. Anyways, other openings where the bishop pair is almost useless are openings like the Stonewall attack, the Trompowsky, the French defense, etc. Anyways, fact number 4, two bishops are useless in closed positions. This is the simplest way to remember that bishops are better than knights only in open positions. So to use the bishop pair, you need to open up the position. Like in this case, you can see that white has two bishops, but they are almost useless. They can't do a thing. It is black's 2 knights that can only make progress in this position, so knights are extremely good in closed positions. For example, white may play bishop f2, then you can go king e8. I mean, the whole idea is that white doesn't have many sensible moves. Pawn to h4 is a good attempt, but black can just take. And after bishop takes h4, by the way, there is no need to memorize this. I'm just trying to make a point. You can go knight g6, a tactical move, by the way. You want to plant your knight on f4 forever. If you think bishop takes f6 wins a pawn, well, that loses the bishop immediately. White's bishop is trapped. So this is how useless 2 bishops can be in closed positions. Here is a great London system example where 2 bishops can shine. In an open position, you can see that this dark squared bishop has more squares that it's covering. Even the light squared bishop, it has more space and more squares to go to. Unlike black's 2 bishops, the light squared bishop is a bad bishop, and equally black's dark squared bishop isn't active on e7. Another example, here we have 2 bishops in an open position that can even be more powerful than 1 rook and 2 pawns. E.g., in this position, it's white to play and win the rook in 1 move. Leave the answers in the comment section down below so that I can also learn of your existence. Let's go! If you want to successfully utilize your bishop pair, play openings that are more likely to lead to an open position. For example, the open Ruilo pairs, the Gioco Piano, the Italian opening, the Scotch game, the 4 knights game, the 2 knights defense, the Evans Gambit, King's Gambit. For example, I like playing the Deuce Gambit, which starts with e4, then e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, then black plays the top plate move, bishop c5, I go castle short, inviting knight to f6, the top plate move, and then I play pawn to d4 immediately. The reason why I like the Deuce Gambit against black's Gioco Piano is that at least it forces black to give up his bishop pair very early. All of these moves highlighted in red for black are blunders. And this line also opens up the position right in the opening stage. So black has to take with the bishop anyways, then I take back with my knight. So on the other hand, if you don't like entertaining your opponent's bishop pair, you can play openings that are more likely to lead to a closed position, e.g. openings that are in the Queen's Gambit family, like the Queen's Gambit itself, Slav defense, semi-Slav Queen's Pawn game, or even the Reti opening, the Catalan, the Czech Benoni, the King's Indian defense, etc. That's if you don't want to entertain your opponent's bishop pair. Anyways, fact number 5. Bishops smile in open diagonals. You must open diagonals if you have an extra bishop. The position that we're looking at is from the Deuce Gambit, which I showed you in the last chapter. Black just took our knight on d4, and then here I would love to open up the diagonals for my bishops, for example, beginning with pawn to f4. So they have to play pawn to d6, after which I take on e5. And after d takes e5, you can clearly see how open the diagonals are for my 2 bishops. I can play pawn to a3 on the next move. Let's move on. Fact number 6. Bishops and pawns of the same color are enemies. Period. Do not place your pawns on the same color as your key bishop. This is mostly the case in openings like the advanced Caro-Kann defense and the semi-Slav or the Slav defense. Let's say after white plays the top plate move, bishop g5 or pawn to e3, say bishop g5. You get rid of your light squared bishop. After e takes f3, since you no longer have a light squared bishop, you start controlling the light squares on the board with your pawns. This automatically satisfies the middle game principle that do not place your pawns on the same color as your key bishop. For example, we have a dark squared bishop here, so we don't need our pawns to be on dark squares. Bishops and pawns of the same color are enemies, especially in the end game. Fact number 7. Opposite colored bishops are much more drawish. The easiest endings to draw are those with bishops of opposite colors, ladies and gentlemen. This position can be a dead draw since your pawn on f7 is on a different color as your opponent's bishop. Here is how you can draw this game so easily. Just make sure that your king is just moving on light squares and also your bishop. For example, king g4. Let's say bishop d6, you can go bishop h5. This is just a dead draw, but you need to be very careful. For example, here you cannot take the pawn, so you only have pawn to f6. If bishop e7, now your light squared bishop can freely move. If bishop takes, you can take back with your king. By the way, you're going to go back to the g4 square and start moving your bishop along this diagonal. There is no progress that white can make from here. For example, pawn to h5 is a blunder because you simply go back and on the next move you're going to win that pawn. So this is just to demonstrate how drawish games of opposite colored bishops can be. Fact number 8. Same colored bishops are not always drawish. But your king must be in front of your opponent's king. That's number 1. Or it must be much closer to the square of promotion than your opponent's king is. If black's king was on d5, for example, or e6, this could be an easy draw because your opponent's king is also closer to the square of promotion and may sit in front of your pawn on the light square. So now this is clearly winning for white. If only you can find pawn to a4. If bishop e7 check, you still continue marching forward. King e8, bishop f6. Your bishop must be in front of your pawn. If bishop takes f6, black's king will be in opposition and you are assured of winning this endgame. For example, king e8, then you go pawn to f6. This is clearly winning because black's king is in opposition. So maybe the right question to ask is a bishop better than a knight in this or that opening, rather than putting it general? Or which one is more valuable between the knight and the bishop in an open endgame? In that case, the answer would be the bishop. If you are aiming for an open game, keep your bishops as they become more powerful. And if you prefer a closed or defensive game, then prioritize your knights to enhance maneuverability and increase the chances of creating forks. Is a bishop better than a knight? Well, it depends with the position. My general answer is because most chess games tend to become open as they progress, I would say bishops generally have the upper hand. But remember, every game is unique and the best piece is the one that fits your strategy at that moment. If you keep on thinking that bishops are always better than knights, you will end up making wrong choices, even in positions where you are required to sacrifice a bishop or trade it off to simplify the game. Okay guys, here's another task. Sacrifice a free bishop or simply sack your bishop in order to win fast. Now I know some of you guys may think this is just crazy, but the wisest would be able to realize that what I'm teaching you guys are positional sacrifices. This is where you sack a big piece in order to take your opponent out of his prep. You make them lose their right to castle, and then later on you emerge with a better position. So if you're interested to learn more, stay tuned and let's get started. Trap number 2 in the England Gambit. So this is where white begins with d4, then you go e5, d takes e5, bishop c5, and once again you can see the top played move is knight to f3. Well, I suggest you go d6, letting white to take your pawn, and then very quickly you pre-move knight to e7 as if it's a blunder. Now you guys, I'm not just making up these stuffs. Look at this, d takes e7 is still the top played move. It seems most people don't know that if they take the knight, there is this little trap where they will lose their queen. But anyways, you won't see most prepared opponents playing d takes e7. You will see them playing bishop g5 or simply bishop f4. It doesn't matter. I just recommend to ignore the d6 pawn and develop your queen's knight, because once again white cannot take on c7 or e7 because of the same tactic. So you can see the top played move is pawn to e3 here, stopping the possible bishop sacrifice. And so this is when you take back on d6. And look at this, you guys. Again, bishop b5 is by far the top played move, pinning your knight to the king, but I recommend that immediately you go queen a5 check, and at the same time attacking white's bishop on b5. So they are going to play the top played move knight c3. This is only the 8th move of the game, you guys, and already you can shock your opponent by sacrificing your bishop on a3. Yes, if ba, now you take the knight with check. Queen d2 is impossible because of queen takes a1, and if knight d2, now you go bishop f5, putting more pressure on the c2 pawn, and let's say rook c1, you simply castle short, life goes on. Instead of ba, if rook b1 is played, trying to protect the b2 pawn, well, this is a big blunder because now you can simply take on b2, and after rook takes b2, you simply win white's rook like this, and next you are threatening to win the light squared bishop. So if white doesn't play bishop takes a3 or rook b1 defending the b2 pawn, they can also try queen c1, but this only invites knight d5, putting more pressure on this knight, and if castle short you just take that knight. White's pawn on b2 is still pinned by our bishop to the queen. Again, if ba, that hangs the light squared bishop. So that's just how you can sacrifice your bishop in the England Gambit. Let's move on. Trap number 3 in the accelerated London system. Now with white pieces, you start with d4 and you can see d5 is the top played move. Now you go bishop f4 and again knight to f6 is what everybody plays. You can see with your own eyeballs. Pawn to e3, and let me switch to the Masters database to show you what well-prepared opponents play in this position. You can see pawn to c5 is what most people do in OTB games. Pawn to c5, well, after which I recommend you simply go knight to f3, and again knight c6 is what everybody plays. Knight bd2, and now black has an option to play queen b6 or simply develop his light squared bishop before closing his pawn chain with pawn to e6. For example, bishop g4 prepares for e6, bishop d6, and castle short. That's what black is planning to do. So you simply go pawn to c3, they'll continue with their plan, and I suggest you unpin your knight by playing queen a5. And look what I'm talking about, you guys. You will see that bishop d6 is what everybody plays, which is a blunder, because now you have an option to again sack your bishop on a6, just like what we did in the England Gambit, you guys. Because if ba, now you can simply take the knight with check. If queen d7, the rook on a8 falls. If knight d7, that hangs the bishop. And well, if black plays king e7, the only sensible move, you should first of all go queen b7 check, maybe trying to win the pawn on a6. If queen d7, first of all you take the bishop, black has to take with his king, and then you win a free pawn. If the king goes back to e7, you are going to win another free pawn on a6. How is this pawn free? Because you can go queen b4 check, and on the next move you are going to triple fork black's king, his queen, and the light squared bishop. Game over. So that's why in most cases you won't see black taking on a6. After you sacrifice your bishop, they may play something like bishop takes a4, which is the top played move, but this only allows you to take on b7, attacking the rook on a8 and the knight on c6. They all castle short. Now that's when you can take the free knight, and on the next move, you don't even take the rook, even if you can, but you first of all play an in-between move, d takes c5, putting more pressure on the free bishop. So they have to take, and that's when you take the rook. Game over. Instead of bishop takes a6 or bishop f4, if they think of defending all of their pieces with queen c7, well, you first of all take the poor bishop, and after queen takes d6, again you have bishop takes b7, the same problem. So if you want to know more about this trap and other London system related traps, you can watch the video that has popped up in the card above called the 10 best London system traps. Let's move on. Trap number 4, the Bushgas Gambit. Now this looks like the Stafford Gambit, except that we do not play knight to f6 in this position, but rather go bishop c5, still sacrificing our pawn on e5. And again, you can see in the Leech's database, you guys, most people are used to moving their bishop first because they thought you were going to play knight c6 defending the e5 pawn. So they play this move automatically. That's why it's the top played move, bishop c4. But if you want to know what to do against knight takes e5, you can simply watch the video that has popped up in the card above, where I covered this gambit in more detail. But anyways, bishop c4 is what most people are going to play, especially if they didn't see that your pawn on e5 was hanging. So here I suggest you play the move that I didn't recommend in my last Bushgas Gambit video, pawn to d5 right away. The idea is that if they play the top played move, e takes d5, as you can see, now you can go pawn to e4, harassing the knight on f3. Again, you can see knight on e5 is by far the top played move, you guys. And this is when you can simply sack your bishop, making white to lose his right to castle, and then you go queen f6 check. You want to win back your piece. If they go king g1 like what most people do, you simply take back your knight. And look at this, you guys. Knight to c3 is the top played move, which is a blunder because that hangs the light squared bishop after queen d4 check. I mean, even if white plays pawn to d4 in this position instead of knight c3, you can just take that with ampersand, and after queen takes d3, you don't want to exchange your queens. If they play knight c3, you castle short, done. So once again, after white plays bishop c4, I still recommend to go d5. Then this time you might not see them taking with their pawn. Instead, they may do it with their bishop. What do? You don't resign. You simply go knight to f6. You want to take their light squared bishop. And see this position, you guys. They don't know what they're doing. For example, the top played move is knight to c3, which is a mistake because that allows you to take their bishop pair. And after knight takes d5, you first of all castle short, giving up another pawn on e5. If knight takes e5, that's when you go c6. The whole idea is to make them lose their right to castle once again. King takes f2, you go queen d4 check. And if they play the top played move once again, king f1, you don't even have to take the knight on e5 right away. You have pawn to f5, which will open up the f file for your rook. And on the next move, you're going to win this knight and continue putting more pressure on white. Alright. Trap number 5 in the modern risky gambit. The so-called reverse Stafford gambit, now with white pieces, where you aim at achieving this position which is on the board right now. If you see me going through these openings very fast, it's because I have done a number of videos on them in different variations or using different lines. But anyways, if you watched this video that has popped up in the card above, you will know that the correct move in this position is pawn to f6. That's what we want to see. Just go ahead and castle short. And here one of the challenging moves is pawn to d6, but hey, you can first of all try to sack your knight. The idea is that if they take your free knight, now you give them a check on e1 with your rook, and they all block with their bishop. And ladies and gentlemen, this is when you perform a positional sacrifice, bishop h6, again sacrificing your bishop in the opening stage in order to gain some initiative. For example, if king f8, there's a mate on f7 immediately, so black should not do that. You will see them playing king d7. Remember what I said in my previous video where you sack your knight in every opening? I said bishop e6 check is very drawish, so just go queen f5 check. If king c6, that will be mate in 1. If black decides to go back to e8, it is up to you to force a draw like this. Or maybe, instead of repeating your moves, you can simply shock your opponent by simply sacrificing your rook right away. You sacrifice another piece on e7, that's check. If queen takes, take the free bishop. And on the next move, you're going to win black's queen. And there's this beautiful line where you even sack your queen, because if they take, that will be mate in 2 like this. I mean, after king e8 and rook takes e7 check, if black doesn't take with his queen and instead they take with the king, you still go rook e1 check, and on the next move, you'll be in control of the game. For example, queen d7, you take the pawn on h6 check and end up winning black's queen like this. And just a hint, to maintain your +1 advantage according to Stockfish, you need to keep your light squared bishop on the board. Note that black's pieces are all sleeping at the back. Just that showing all of black's pawns and you'll be good to go. Position is like +1.1 in favor of white here. Stockfish thinks white will win this game. Alright. Trap number 6 in the Ruy Lopez exchange variation. You guys should be ready of this opening, the Ruy Lopez. Just remember to begin with a6, and if bishop a4, you go knight to f6 before playing bishop e7. That's the main remedy. But instead of white playing bishop a4, they also have an option of taking your knight right away, entering the exchange variation. By the way, it's not advisable for white to take on e5 because you have queen d4 attacking both the knight and the pawn on e4. So you will see them playing castle short, which is the top played move. Now you go bishop g4, pinning the knight to the queen. And again, you can see the top played move is h3, attacking your bishop. But well, who cares about that bishop? We are sacrificing a piece in order to get a good position. For example, if hg, now you are simply winning after h takes g4. And I was surprised to see that most white players take on e5 with their knight. This leads to mate. After queen h4, let's say pawn to f4, you play g3 and white's king cannot escape from Sobibo. So again, after bishop g4 and then they play h3, I suggest you still go pawn to h5. Now instead of taking, you may see white playing pawn to d3, the top played move. Please don't play knight to f6, that will be losing, because that will only obstruct your queen's vision on h4, and that will allow white to freely take your light squared bishop. So better play queen f6, an improved prophylactic move. Again, white cannot take your bishop. They all play knight bd2 as you can see. So now you go pawn to g5, you keep on attacking. If they play knight c4, just go ahead and simplify the game, and you can see how bad white's pawn structure is. On the next move, you play f6 and develop your pieces as highlighted. Done. Bishop e2 is such a very powerful move, even though the majority of you guys don't just realize how powerful it is. So let me demonstrate this in our first opening out of 5 other openings that I'm going to show you. So our first opening is the Taylor opening, where you begin with pawn to e4 as white, then black responds with e5, knight f3, knight c6, then instead of going bishop c4, the top played move, or even bishop b5, this is where you can play this silent prophylactic move, bishop e2. And this, ladies and gentlemen, sets out our first dirty trap, e.g. if bishop c5, you are simply winning, you should just go ahead and take the free pawn on e5 like this, hence sacrificing your knight, after which you play pawn to d4, double attacking the bishop and the knight. Theory says black should play bishop d6, after which you take. If they take, yes, material is equal, but you are just ahead in development, and if black is not careful, you might end up winning more free pawns like the g7 pawn and the rook. If queen f6, by the way, you have pawn to e5. If they play pawn to f6, the top played move, you can simply go knight c3 and continue developing as highlighted. Remember, it's not just about traps, it's also about being ahead in development and having a comfortable middle game position. So this is what the computer suggests, that after pawn to d4, black should play bishop d6 and not bishop takes d4, which is the top played move in the Lichess database, because this allows you to take the bishop with tempo, attacking the knight. They play pawn to d6, defending the knight, but you can play knight c6 followed by knight d5 ideas if you want, but why not going for the kill right away? You attack the knight on e5 with f4. If they play knight c6, the top played move, this is when you take the free pawn on g7. They'll play queen f6, but hey, you don't have to trade off your powerful queen with your opponent's less active queen. I've been talking about this for centuries. Just go queen g3 and continue playing as highlighted. Going back a few moves, after queen takes d4 and pawn to d6 by black, I said just go pawn to f4, so that if knight c6, you take the free pawn on g7. But what if black plays pawn to c5, counter-attacking your queen? Well, you just go queen c3. Black's knight is still pinned to the pawn on g7. If knight g6 is played, you have queen takes g7. Again, you're just going to be up a pawn for nothing. Knight takes f6 by black attacks your e4 pawn, so you have to defend it, right? And position here is about 4.4 in favor of white. Suffice to win the game. So this is just how beautiful bishop e2 can be in the Taylor opening. The whole idea is to wait for black to blunder with bishop c5, after which we take and put them in a fork situation where we become ahead in development. But what if black plays an intermediate move, bishop takes f2 check, before taking back your knight? Because I mean, they don't want to be attacked this way. So instead of taking on e5, they would rather play bishop takes f2 check first, an in-between move, so that once you take, now they can freely take on e5 with their knight. But hey, this turns out to be a mistake for black. It looks like black gained initiative by making you lose the right to castle, but check on Stockfish. This is the worst thing that black can do against the Taylor opening. First of all, you are one move away from castling short by hand. For example, you can just play rook f1 here and put your king to safety, or play actively with pawn to d4, so that if knight g6 or knight c6, now you can simply go pawn to c3, solidifying your center pawns. By the way, if queen f6, you have bishop f3 or even king g1, anything. If d6, you just go rook f1, and on the next move, you're going to put your king to safety. If black rushes out with a move, queen f6 instead of playing knight c6, let's say queen f6 check. If you evaluate this position with your nose, with your eyeballs, you will notice that you can't play bishop f3, blocking the check, because you don't want this to happen. I mean, if you take like this, they have all sorts of tactics on you. You're giving black more time to come up with initiative, so you don't want this to happen. So instead of blocking with a bishop, when black's knight is still on e5, this is where you can just go king g1. Trust me with all your fingers, your king on g1 is the safest king in the world. Let's say knight c6, double attacking the pawn. You have bishop e3, so you develop a piece while defending, which is a good thing. If they play the top played move, pawn to d6, you simply go knight c3 and continue playing as highlighted. Pawn to h3, followed by king h2, then develop your rook like this. You have all the time to do this, by the way. Alright, let's see more lines in the Taylor opening. So once again, back to our initial position of the Taylor opening, where we play bishop e2. We just saw how bad bishop c5 is. But what if black plays the top played move knight to f6, also played by grandmasters and other advanced players? Well, you can see that our pawn on e4 is now under attack. So knight c3 is good, but pawn to d3 is the main move, which is also the best move. So you just go pawn to d3 because you want to develop your queen's knight on d2 someday. Developing your knight on c3 will block your c pawn. So you want your c pawn to sit on c3, like as if you are playing the gioco pianissimo or something like that. If black plays bishop c5, by the way, you are just going to castle short and be good. If pawn to d5, you don't want to exchange your queens after this trade happens. So the move to consider here is knight bd2, so that if d takes e4 comes, you can simply take back with no problems at all. You don't want to exchange your queens. So the knight on d2 is covering your queen, and whenever you see bishop c5, just castle short. That's how simple this game is. And let's say black castle short, which is the top played move. I want you to think about this position. What do you do next? Try to identify black's potential moves here. What is the key move in the gioco pianissimo or in these kinds of positions? Well, I'm going to answer you right now. The key move in the Italian game or in the gioco pianissimo, which I also talked about in my gioco pianissimo course, is pawn to c3, simply taking away the d4 and the b4 squares from black's knight. It's a very powerful move, and whenever you see pawn to f5, you just meet that with pawn to f4, or you can just do nothing about that. Just go queen c2. It's not much of a stretch, but just stop that pawn. If bishop g4 is played, you go pawn to h3, they'll play bishop h5 obviously, but this allows you to go knight h4. By the way, there are so many things that you can do, that's why I like this opening. You can even play queen c2 here. You can even play rook e1 and relocate your queen's knight to the king side. All these are ideas. So in this position, knight h4 just happens to be one of the good moves or good strategies that you can consider. If they take, well and good. You will have a nice spot for your knight on f5. If they go bishop g6, just trade off that thing, and let's say queen c2. Again, you have rook d1 coming and knight f3. I mean, just visualize that your queen is sitting on h4 and your knight is on g5. So this should be good for your eyeballs. So enough of the Taylor opening, you guys. This should be good for you. If you want to know more about these kinds of structures, simply check out my gioco pianissimo course, which is on my website, www.KaspaChess.com, and you will thank me later. I think it's one of my best courses in terms of presentation. Let's move on to the next opening. Opening number 2 against the Sicilian defense. How can you play bishop e2 against the Sicilian defense and gain a decisive advantage? Well, that's what we are going to be looking at in my next video. So before I move on to other beautiful openings, let me give you another bonus opening where you can play this bishop e2 very early in the opening stage in order to confuse your opponents. So this may happen in the Ponziani opening as well, where you go pawn to e4, then after e5 you play knight f3, normal stuff, knight c6, and then this time instead of going bishop e2, you go pawn to c3, and of course you're going to see most of your opponents playing knight to f6, attacking your undefended e4 pawn, but you don't give a damn about this pawn. I mean, you just go pawn to d4, because if they play the top played move, it takes d4, by the way. You don't want to take back immediately. You have pawn to e5, and on the next move, you're going to take on d4, solidifying your center pawns, which is why most black players don't even take on d4. They rather play something like knight takes e4, but once again, you have two options, bishop d3 followed by pawn to d5, which will allow you to take back the pawn that you sacrificed. For example, knight takes e5 and knight takes e5, well, you can simply take back, and next, you're going to hold on to your e5 pawn easily after castling short. So because of these lines, you won't see black players taking either on d4 or on e4 right away. They like playing the third common move, pawn to d6, as you can see, and here you have an opportunity to go bishop b5. But speaking of the power of bishop e2, you can try this move even here to mock your opponents. One may ask, what happens if black takes? Well, you still have pawn to d5, so they play the top played move knight e7, as you can see, but this fails due to queen a4 check, ladies and gentlemen, and once again, you are going to win a free knight on e4. So now let's look at other openings where you can also play bishop e2 to gain initiative and probably win fast in the opening stage. Let's move on to the next opening. Opening number 2 against the Sicilian defense. how can you play bishop e2 against the Sicilian defense and gain a decisive advantage? Well, you start with e4. Obviously, they'll play c5. That's the Sicilian defense, arguably the best defense against e4. So you go knight to f3 and relax. There are two popular moves in this position which you are going to see. The first one is knight c6 and the second one is pawn to d6. Let's begin with the Najaf invitation move, pawn to d6. Whenever I see the d6 Sicilian, which may possibly lead to the Najaf variation, I visualize queen a4 check and probably go on to win the game on the next move. Here is how I start. I play pawn to c3. Black plays knight to f6, attacking the e4 pawn, but I don't give a damn about this pawn. I just go bishop e2. Once again, you can see this powerful move, a very silent move, and believe you me guys, over 130,000 people so far have taken on e4, which I know most of your opponents would do, which is a blunder because now you have queen a4 check and black cannot stop this capture with his forehead. Anyways, going back a few moves, after you play bishop e2, a silent move, one may argue to say black doesn't always take on e4. They go knight c6, but hey, just don't pay attention to this hanging pawn. Just do your thing, play pawn to d4. Once again, if they take this pawn on e4 with their knight, you have this beautiful trick where you go pawn to d5, attacking the knight. If they play knight e5, this is when you can go queen a4 check right away and win the free knight. Or you start like this. After de, you now go queen a4 check, and on the next move, grab that free knight. So this is all possible because of the move that you played, bishop e2, which is silent. Anyway, let's go back and see what can happen if black doesn't capture on e4 with his knight again. Let's say they play c takes d4 first because they seem to know this trap. Well, you still go c takes d4. Don't just care about the e4 pawn. Again, if they play knight takes e4, you know what to do. But this time, they might think they are clever by playing this in-between move, queen a5 check. Because the thing is, now they are preventing you from going queen a4 check, which wins the knight. So here you are forced to play knight c3, but trust me, the game is still equal even though black is temporarily up a pawn. Let them take on c3, just take back. And here is the catch. Most of your opponents would take on c3 with check, but this is a big blunder because after bishop d2, both of black's pieces are hanging, the knight and the queen. Black will surely lose a free piece in this line. One may argue to say black doesn't have to take on c3 after b takes c3. They can play knight e5, the top played move, first of all saving their knight, but hey, you just take that knight and it doesn't even matter if black takes. But at this stage, black doesn't want to double up his pawns along the e file, so he prefers capturing on e5 with his queen this way. Like after bishop d2, blocking the check, that's when they take with their queen. But once again, this turns out to be a losing mistake for black. You can just go rook c1. Someday you want to sacrifice your rook on c8 with check and then play bishop b5, check given a chance. But hey, it's a free world. Black will continue grabbing free pawns like your d5 pawn. So just cast a shot. Even at this stage, Stockfish still favors white. You can check the engine later. Black is just behind in development. For example, if pawn to e6 comes, you can simply go game over. How is this bad for black? If they go bishop e7, the top played move, now you go queen a4 check and they can't block this check with their light squad bishop or with their anchor pawn. So they have to play king f8. After which you now go queen c2. There is no real way for black to rescue his light squad bishop. That is a free bishop. It is these silent moves that separate sheep from goats in chess. Let me know in the comment section if you want to be a goat or a sheep in chess. As for me, I don't want to be any of that. Not even a dog. Anyway, back to the initial position of the Sicilian defense after e4 and c5 where you play knight to f3. So we just finished looking at what to do against pawn to d6. So now the question that begs to be answered is, what if black plays knight c6? Well, obviously you don't resign. Once again, you just go pawn to c3. Playing in the Alpine variation style, and black has two options. Do they play pawn to d6 or pawn to e6? If they play d6, we have a higher chance of getting back to the position or the line that we just covered, where black plays knight to f6, attacking our undefended pawn on e4, and we go bishop e2, allowing them to take so that we can go pawn to d5. And this is pretty much the same position that we looked at previously, where black plays an intermediate move, queen a5 check, forcing you to block with a knight, and then they take, you take. And in case of queen takes c3 check, this is why you play bishop d2. We looked at this. So even in the knight c6 line, positions may still transpose. Against knight c6, you still go pawn to c3, but what if they play the top played move in this position, pawn to e6? Again, the secret is not to resign. You go pawn to d4. Most of the times they'll take, you just take back, maintaining your two central pawns. And now it is up to black. If they play knight to f6 here, wait a second. This time it doesn't make sense to play knight c3 protecting this pawn, because you are giving black more time to develop his pieces like this and threatening to capture on e4. So you want to protect this e4 pawn with your bishop d3. So this is the only modification that you can do. I mean, just because this video is about bishop e2, it doesn't mean that that will always be applicable. I'm giving you an idea. You need to be flexible in chess. Just go bishop d3, protecting your e4 pawn. If knight c3 comes, this is when you can develop, let them take, you take back. Bishop b4 this time doesn't make sense, because you can just cast a shot. If they take, you will fix your pawn structure on the center. If they cast a shot, you just go pawn to e5, and Stockfish favors white in this position. There's no point for you to lose this game. Anyway, once again, in the knight c6 line, you want to play pawn to c3, and after pawn to e6, you still go d4, they take, you take back, and instead of knight to f6 this time, if they play pawn to d5 immediately, you don't want to take on d5 and remain with an isolated pawn in the long run. You just go pawn to e5, taking away the f6 square from the king's knight. So they'll play knight ge7, developing their knight. Obviously, they want to put their king's knight on f5 or g6. So you go knight c3, they'll play knight f5. Against the French defense positions, pawn to a3 works a lot of wonders. Just play it as soon as you can. Just go pawn to a3. Obviously, they'll go queen b6, putting more attackers on your d4 pawn, but thanks to this pawn on a3, because now you can go knight a4, and there's nothing that black can do. They won't be able to win your d4 pawn if you play knight a4. So that's the secret. Next, you're going to play bishop b2. So this is just about the Sicilian defense. Now we're good to move on. Opening number 3 is the French defense. So you start with e4, they'll play e6. This is somewhat annoying, but let me show you the standard way you can play against the French defense. After pawn to d4, they will obviously play d5, because that's what French players are taught to do. They play like robots, doing the same thing over and over. And one funny person said, madness is doing the same thing over and over while expecting different results. Anyways, against the French, I recommend the advanced variation where they play pawn to c5. That's what they do. I mean, what else do they know? So you go pawn to c3. First secret, against the French defense, just think of playing these 3 pawn moves. You're done. They will play knight c6, playing like a robot once again. You have an option to go knight f3 if you want. But since we are looking at the power of bishop e2, even in this position, you can play bishop e2. It's better than developing our bishop on d3, because developing it on d3 would block the vision of our queen on d1. For example, they go queen b6, putting more pressure on the d4 pawn. Now, this is when we can go knight to f3. And if c takes d4 happens, you just take back. So you see, because your light squared bishop is sitting on e2, your d4 pawn is well defended. Once again, French players can't develop their knight this way, so they develop it on e7 first, planning to put it on f5. So let me show you a trick here. Whenever you see knight ge7 in the French defense, provided that your pawn is not already on a3, you can go knight a3. So you only want to play knight a3 once black plays knight ge7, which blocks his dark squared bishop. So if they play knight a5, now your knight on a3 is under attack for real, so you want to play knight c2. Problem solved. And now you can continue playing your normal chess after castling shot. You have 3 defenders against 3 attackers. So this is pretty much an equal game. The game may continue as follows. If bishop b4 check comes, don't take because you're giving black an initiative. So the best place for your king is f1. For reference sake, Hikaru Nakamura played this in 2004 against Ibrahimov in the USA Championship and won a very good game. You can check out that game. If you are waiting for me to show you some cheap tricks with this, I'm sorry, I won't. This line is for serious classical players that can be used in real tournament matches. Let's move on. Opening number 4 against the Caro-Kann defense. So after e4 and pawn to c6, you can play all sorts of things against the Caro-Kann. Pawn to d4 is one of them, for example. Or even my favorite 2 knights attack, which I covered in the video that has popped up in the card above. But speaking of the power of bishop e2, that's what we are going to play here. After pawn to e4, obviously, Caro-Kann players will play pawn to d5, just like French players. Now, this is when you play pawn to e5. Simple stuff. They're going to develop their light squared bishop before closing that pawn chain. This is what Caro-Kann players are taught to do, by the way. I have an amazing Caro-Kann course on my website. You can check it out also. So you just go knight to f3. Simple stuff. Nothing has changed. It's just that your bishop is on e2. If pawn to c5 comes, the top played move, you just go bishop e3. The whole idea is to give room to your queen, as highlighted, because bishop d3, like I said, oftentimes blocks the vision of our queen on d2. You don't want to put your bishop on d3. If they take, you take back with your knight, not your bishop, because this comes with an attack. They'll play bishop g6, and this is your ideal position, you guys. Remember this position. By the way, black is just behind the tempo in this line. You can go h4, h5 if you want, but the main line is castle short. If they go knight c6, attacking your e5 pawn, I want you to remember playing this tricky move, pawn to c4. There is a beautiful trap that is hidden right here. If black plays the top played move, knight takes e5, just know that's a blunder because you have d takes e5, and after queen takes d5, you can simply go queen a4 check, and there's pretty much nothing that black can do. Black is losing. For example, if knight c6, you just take that poor knight. If queen takes c6, obviously you have bishop b5 pinning the queen to the king, so they are not going to take back with their queen. They're going to do it with their pawn, but you simply play bishop f3 and black can't stop you from capturing the c6 pawn. If queen d6, by the way, you just take that pawn with check, and next you're going to take the free rook on a8. Let me know what you think about this line in the comment section down below. If you don't feel like commenting, just do it for the algorithm to support my channel. After all, I read all your comments, so you have no reason not to comment. Anyways, let's see what else black can do in this line while you play pawn to c4 on move 9. So we just saw how bad knight takes e5 is. If they take with their pawn, you just go knight takes c6. Yeah, it looks like a queen exchange will happen, but this is only good for you. First of all, you can take this for free, but why not taking that pawn with your knight? I mean, isn't this the dream position you would love to have in a real tournament? Let me know in the comment section. These are the kinds of positions you want to enter with in the middle game, like for real. Let's look at the last demonstration of how powerful bishop e2 is in the Perk defense. Opening number 5 against the Perk defense. So you start with pawn to e4 again. They play d6, that's the pierce on the Perk defense. Now the move that I want you to play in this position is pawn to e5 right away. You blaze out this move because trust me, most of your unprepared opponents who don't have patience will play the second most played move, knight to f6, after which you just take that knight. Trust me, this trick will happen most of the times. If they don't blunder their knight and then they take, you just go knight to f3, attacking the pawn. If they attack your knight, you want to get back your pawn, that's all. They will play the top played move, knight to f6, but this is when you play d3, turning this into the tennis on gambit, while you sacrifice your knight on f7, double attacking the queen and rook. If king takes, you go bishop g6 check. They have to take the bishop, after which you win the free queen. And that's all for today, you guys. Let me know which episode you liked the most in the comment section down below. And if at all you would love to see more of these kinds of content where I compile my favorite videos in one collection, of course, to make it easier for you guys, let me know. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, bye bye.